The scripture this morning will be read from Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?"
You may be seated. Guys in the back, I don't know what I did with the clicker, but if you're able to keep up with me, you're welcome to do that. If not, we're going to be in eventually in Mark chapter 4, right there where we just were. Also in Mark chapter 5. But as we begin this morning, as parents, we teach our kids all kinds of things, specifically when they are very young. One of the things specifically that we teach our kids is that as little kids, you are not supposed to talk to strangers, right? Now, if you're like my kids meet no stranger, right? And there's probably a good lesson there for us as adults and as Christians that we should, treat people that way. But as a general rule, as adults, we don't get to where we trust somebody until we actually spend some time with that person, right? Now, the same is true for the disciples of Jesus. Now, some might say, well, these disciples, some of them just left everything that they knew and were doing and started following Jesus before they ever knew really anything about them. But the whole time that they were with Jesus, they were trying to figure him out, right? To try to figure out who, in fact, he was. And a lot of what Jesus does in his ministry is teach his disciples and teach us who, in fact, he is. And he does that by demonstrating his authority. In Matthew chapter 28, verses 18, we see that at the end of his time, he tells his disciples essentially, you need to know before I give you this, what we call the Great Commission, right? Hopefully by now you understand that I have authority over all things, right? All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. And so what Jesus does in his time with them is he shares with them by what authority he has to do things. Specifically in Mark chapter 1, in verse 27, we see that right off the bat in his ministry, he teaches his disciples that he has authority to cast out unclean spirits. That's who he is. He has that authority. But he continues on in Mark chapter 2. We see that not only can he cast out unclean spirits, but we know that he can heal people. Specifically, we can see that he can heal a paralyzed man. He can cast out unclean spirits. We see that he can, in Mark 1:34, that he can heal the sick, he can heal demons. But then Mark chapter 2, verse 10, not only does he heal a paralyzed man, but he also has the authority or the power to forgive sins. But then he doesn't stop there. In Mark chapter 2 and verse 28, the next passage there, we see that he teaches his disciples that he has authority over the Sabbath. Now, not long after this, we see that we come in between Mark 2 and Mark chapter 4, we see that Jesus teaches his disciples who he is by teaching in parables. And when we get to Mark chapter 4, the passage that was just read for us, we see that Jesus has spent a long day teaching his disciples more about who he is through the form of parables. And we see that Jesus finds himself in the middle of the Sea of Galilee with his disciples. Now, it's obvious from this passage right here, we see that Jesus was exhausted, right? If you are a teacher or you spent time teaching Bible class and preaching, you know what teacher tired is, right? It's exhausting when you spend an entire day teaching. You just want to go home and go to sleep sometime, or just, you're exhausted. You can't do anything else. Essentially, that's what Jesus just done here. He spent his entire day teaching his disciples more about who he is, and now he finds himself asleep at the front of this small boat with the disciples out in the middle of the sea, but not just floating around. We see that he's in the middle of a great storm. It says, "And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling, but he, being Jesus, was in the stern asleep on a pillow." Now, the next verse there, we see that the disciples must have been terrified. And it says, "They awoke him and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?'" You see, we can tell from this verse that this must have been a terrifying storm, because several of these men, they lived on the sea, right? They knew this sea. They lived on it because they were fishermen, but they too were terrified. So the text says that they woke Jesus because they wanted Jesus to be with them. But what's interesting is what we see here is, even though all the things that Jesus has taught them about himself up to this point, that he could heal the sick, that he had authority over forgiving sins and over the Sabbath and healing lepers and healing paralyzed men, they still didn't quite understand who Jesus was, right? Because they still see Jesus as their teacher rather than their Lord. Mark chapter 4, verse 39, it continues and says, "Then he arose and rebuked the winds and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the winds ceased, and there was a great calm." Do you realize what Jesus has just done here? Jesus has just told the winds and the waves to be still. He has told them to hush, essentially to quit causing so much chaos. Essentially, what Jesus does here for his disciples is he demonstrates to them that not only does he have authority over the winds and the waves, but he has authority over nature. Literally, what Jesus does here is he tells nature to hush, to be quiet, and to be still, to stop causing so much chaos. Now, I don't know if this was Mark's intent here, but when I think of this story, I am reminded of Psalm 46. And in Psalm 46, it's all about the storms of life, right, that are going on in people's life. And I think Jesus is also saying here, by causing the storm to be still, he's wanting his disciples to know, and he's wanting us to know, he's saying, "Be still and know that I am God." Be still and know that I am God, that I'm not just your teacher, but that I am God. Jesus continues in verse 40. He says, "But he said to them, 'Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?' And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, 'Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" You see, to his disciples who have seen Jesus perform miracle after miracle, and now they have seen him control the universe by commanding the winds and the waves to cease, Jesus has to tell these people, why are you still afraid? Even after everything that you know about me, why are you still afraid? You see, the disciples still don't understand who Jesus fully is. Now, if this miracle right here causes them to have questions, which we see from the text it does, because they ask, who can this be, right? Who has the power to do such a thing? What's going to happen next in this story is really probably going to cause some confusion in these men's lives as they try to figure out who Jesus is. So after the storm is over in this story, we see that whoever's the captain of this ship, Jesus, he commands them to go over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now, if you know anything about this area, as we're about to see, this was a place where the Jews would never be caught or seen. Now, we're going to read a lengthy passage here, Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20, and let's see what else Jesus teaches his disciples about himself. It says, "Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains. And the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, 'What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, that you do not torment me.' For he said to him, 'Come out of the man, unclean spirit.' Then he asked him, 'What is your name?' And he answered, saying, 'My name is Legion, for we are many.' Also he begged him earnestly that he would not send him out of the country. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains. So the demons begged him, saying, 'Send us to the swine, that we may enter them.' And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000. And the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. So those who fed the swine fled, and they told it to the city and in the country, and they went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion, sitting and clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it happened to him who had been demon-possessed and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from the region. And when he got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, 'Go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he has had compassion on you.' And he departed and began to proclaim in the Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled." This had to have been confusing, right, for the disciples, because this was a place that Jesus takes them where they would never have gone. And Jesus here, he gets out of the boat, And where he steps is a place that's forbidden for these men to go, because this is Gentile country. This is the first time, at least according to Mark, that Jesus is entering Gentile territory in order to help people understand who he is. Now, if you noticed in the text says that Jesus got out of the boat. Not Jesus and his disciples, but just Jesus gets out of the boat. It seems that the disciples stay in the boat. And you think, well, why didn't the disciples get out of the boat? Why didn't they follow Jesus on this encounter? Well, I can think of a few good reasons why you should stay in the boat. Number one, we've already said this is unclean territory, right? No Jew would ever go on this side of the Sea of Galilee. But number two, Jesus, where he's stepping into is into a graveyard. Now, if you know anything about graveyards, you know anything about the Jews, if they come in contact with the dead, they are unclean, right? And they have to spend a large amount of time going through rituals to get clean again. So they would never step into a graveyard. But number three, this was also a place where pigs lived, over 2,000 pigs, and we know that pigs also were unclean. But probably the most obvious, right? There was a terrifying man that was coming towards them. That would keep me in the boat. This man was a man who was obviously very large, somebody who, the text says that the townspeople could not contain him, right? No amount of chains could keep this man down. This was a man who was cutting himself, obviously had cuts and sores probably all over him, a very terrifying looking man. And so all the while, it didn't stop Jesus. Jesus got out of the boat. Now, if the disciples weren't confused yet about who Jesus was, they were about to be, because the text tells us that these demons who had taken over this man's body, the next passage there tells us that the demons knew who Jesus was. The disciples who have been with Jesus for some time now and seen all these things, they still see Jesus as their teacher. But this man who is demon-possessed, the demons knew exactly who Jesus was. The demons recognized that this is Jesus, the Son of the Most High God. Because of this, it caused this man to fall down and worship Jesus. The disciples hadn't figured it out yet, but this man, this demon-possessed man, knew exactly who Jesus was. The demons in this story acknowledged Jesus' authority over them by causing the man to fall down and worship Jesus. Now, it's interesting in this story that there's three requests that are made, right, to Jesus. The first request is made by the demons. What do the demons ask? Well, the demons ask Jesus, please don't send us away. Rather, let us go into these pigs, right? And Jesus, he grants the request. Now, it's important maybe to know some people get bent out of shape and think, well, why did he kill all these pigs? Well, I think Jesus didn't kill any pigs. Jesus allowed these demons to go into these pigs, and these demons, just like they did with the man, made these pigs crazy, causing them to run into the sea. The demons are the ones who killed the pigs. But the second request is made by the townspeople, right? The townspeople come to Jesus, and what's their reaction? Well, they're not really, doesn't seem to be all that worried about all the pigs, but they are terrified of who? Well, they're terrified of this now man who is no longer possessed by demons, because he's now in his right mind. And so the townspeople say, Jesus, please get out of here. We're Gentiles. We don't want anything to do with you. Get out of here and leave us alone. And so Jesus grants them the request, and he gets out of there. He gets back in the boat. But before he gets back in the boat, there's one more request, or before he leaves, he's in the boat, and one more request comes to him, and this time it's from the once demon-possessed man. And he comes to Jesus and says, "Please let me come with you." Now that would be, we would all want that, right? If we had just been healed like this man, we want to go with Jesus too. But it's interesting that Jesus granted the first two requests, but he didn't grant the third one. This is the first time in Jesus' ministry, at least according to Mark, where he actually grants someone permission to tell others about him. See, when he's doing all this ministry with the Jews and healing people and all these things, he's telling all the Jews to be quiet about it. Don't go and tell others, right? But when he goes into Gentile country, he says, "No, you can't go with me, because I need you to go back and tell your family, tell your friends, everybody that you come in contact with, I want you to go and tell them how I had compassion on you and how I showed you mercy." This story is so fascinating, and I wish I could literally keep you here all day talking about all the things that are fascinating about this, but I won't do that to you. So let me just give you two things that stand out to me when I think about this passage. Number one, after healing this demon-possessed man, Jesus got right back in his boat and left, which tells me that Jesus crossed the sea, went through a storm for this one encounter. Jesus went through a storm and into enemy territory, into unclean territory, in order to show compassion to this one individual. The question that I thought about this week and want to pose to you is, the question is, to what lengths do we go to in order to show compassion to another person? To what lengths do we go to show compassion to another person? Jesus showed compassion and mercy to this demon-possessed man, all while it seems his disciples stayed in the boat and missed the opportunity to minister to this man right side along Jesus. Church, how many times have you been like me or been like the disciples and you are too afraid to get out of the boat? Rather than getting out of the boat or getting out of our cars and going to, maybe it's an unclean area, as we'd say, an unsafe area, or people that we're not as familiar with, how many times do we stay in the boat and miss the opportunity to show compassion to people just like Jesus does here? If you're anything like me, it's very easy to show compassion, right? To have compassion, meaning to feel sorry for somebody because of their circumstances. But I think when we fully understand what true compassion is, and biblical compassion, or at least the compassion that Jesus shows every time he has compassion for somebody, what we see is that it's twofold. And I love this definition about compassion. Compassion is sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. You see, what we learn from this definition, and I think from compassion in the Bible, is that compassion has two parts, right? First, we must see a need and feel sympathetic towards that need. That's the easy part, right? It's easy to see a need or feel sorry for somebody, but following through with step number 2 is more difficult when it comes to true compassion. So step number 1 in showing true compassion is to see a need, but step number 2 is doing something to alleviate their distress. You see, Jesus didn't just go across the sea, through a storm, and into unclean area just to show his disciples how they should feel. about this man and have sympathy for this man, but yet he went over there purposefully for this one encounter to show his disciples how to demonstrate and show compassion to another person. As Christians, if we're going to be people who have a heart of compassion like Jesus, we must understand that true compassion leads to action. True compassion leads to action. Finally, one other thing, when I read this story, or these two stories that are connected together, when I realize that they're really the same story, that they're all connected together from when Jesus starts teaching in parables all the way to when he heals this man, what I realized or thought about is that Jesus is not just interested in calming literal storms, but Jesus is in the business of calming storms inside of people's lives. Jesus is in the business of calming storms in people's lives. Jesus went through a storm in order to calm the storm inside this man's life. And church, he can calm the storms in your life too. This morning, I want to just simply leave you with a challenge. And that challenge is, I want you to find one person this week that you can show true compassion to. Identify someone who is in distress, who is in need, but then don't just stop there by feeling sorry for them. Get out of the boat and help alleviate their distress. But then finally, if you're going through a storm in your life, let me challenge you to seek help. Seek the help you need and let Jesus calm the storms in your life. This morning, if you're here and you're going through a storm or going through difficulty in your life, and you want the prayers of this congregation, the prayers of this leadership to help you to petition these difficulties on your behalf to our Savior, we would love to pray for you. We're going to sing an invitation song right now, and you're welcome to walk down the aisle and make your request known to us, and we would love to pray for you and help you in any way so that Jesus can alleviate the storms in your life. If we can help you with this morning, if we can help you to come to know Jesus better this morning, please don't miss this opportunity. Please come now as we stand and as we sing the invitation song.